Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Jane the Virgin, Season 1, Episode 4, Chapter 4. In this episode, Jane finds out who her father is, and she's also having increasingly strong feelings for Rafael, which results in a dream. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Heather for commissioning this episode. Heather actually didn't commission this episode. Heather commissioned something else, and then at the last second was like, that's not going to work out. You can use this episode for whatever you would like. Very generously, basically donating the slot. And I saw that there was a gap in Jane the Virgin coverage, and I was like, you know what? So I just tossed it in there. And I'm really excited because this episode is like so chock full of a lot of things to talk about that I'm excited to dig in here. Ooh, we've got a bunch of people in the chat. Rowan, Lauren, Claire. Hello, lovelies. Thank you for coming. Okay, so this episode begins with Jane having like a wedding ceremony to her mother, who is dressed in a little tux. Every time that we get a reminder of just how much her mom loves her, it's the cutest thing ever. I never did anything like this as far as I can recall, like doing a wedding with my mom or my dad, which is, you know, borderline creepy, but also kind of common, I think. But I'm just a fan whenever we get to see her as a child and the relationship that the two of them have. So we cut to the present day, and she's in the middle of planning the wedding. She's sitting there with Michael. There are a million wedding magazines, and she is tossing through, like she's going through them, but looking over at Michael with this real apprehension. And when she looks back at the magazine, there's a photo of a man in a suit, a model, for this like groom's style page, and his face transforms into Rafael, who then winks at her. And she, as she's looking at this, her mother is saying about something else entirely, though. Follow your heart. And of course, Jane looks up in kind of a panic and is like, wait, what? What do you mean? And you guys know, I have been married twice, engaged 4 times. Guys love proposing to me. And there is something that I can tell you for a certainty. If you are imagining your wedding day and you're having trouble imagining the dude you're going to marry in the role of the groom, don't get married. Because, full disclosure, the first 2 guys who I was engaged to, I had a really hard time picturing us at the altar together. It was a weird thing that did not raise any red flags for me at the time. I just kind of thought, how am I supposed to picture something like this that I've never done before? You know, of course I can't picture it completely well. It's fine. And then I met Brendan, and he proposed, and I was able to picture us at the altar. No problem. Totally worked. And we got married, and our marriage ended, but I think we had a good time up until the end there. The end got rough, but for the most part, it was a good time. I don't like when people say failed marriage, because I feel like, what does that mean? I think people just mean marriage is supposed to be forever, and if it isn't, then you failed. I take a lot of issue with that, but, you know, what can you say? And then with Owen, what it was with Brendan was that I could picture us getting married. I could not picture us getting old together. And that was another one where I genuinely was like, that's kind of weird, right? Like, it just felt a little strange that I just couldn't even imagine us still being together as elderly people. It was just like, married Owen, I can imagine us old together. No problem. Just completely, immediately, I'm just like, oh yeah, I know exactly what we're going to be like when we're old together. Like, it's just, and I don't, like, everybody's experience is different, I'm not trying to say that my experience should be universal, but just those of you listening, if you are in a relationship and any big moment or thought about the two of you isn't really gelling in your head, I really believe something in your gut knows. Some part of you is aware this isn't really the best idea. So all that to say, as much as I understand the mix of emotions, hormones, everything that's going on with Jane right now, she really, really should not be marrying Michael. I have been I liked Michael at first. The more he lied and gaslit her, the more annoyed I got. He did sort of win me back over at the end of this episode with the way he comes to her and is like, what am I thinking? The worst case scenario I thought was you keeping the kid. And I'm like, that's not it at all. And I really was like, oh, okay. You know what? You you pulled me back in with this one, Michael. That said, a man can be a good man who's trying his best and still not be right for you. Just because he is a good man does not mean you should marry him. I think that's something that a lot of women have been taught, is that basically if a man doesn't beat you, then he's, and he provides, then he's a good husband, a good choice. If you love him, that's enough. It's not. I'm just here to tell you right now, loving someone isn't enough. There has to be more than that. There has to be a genuine partnership that includes respect and honesty and a lot of things. Love isn't all there is. It's just not. And I'm just saying, I appreciate him a lot more now than I did before. But let's be real. Even though he comes to her and says all of this, he still hasn't told her the truth, has he? So I'm just saying. So yeah, this whole scene is the two of them, like, kind of her spacing out, freaking out about the feelings that she's having for Rafael, and finally being like, maybe this is too hard to pull together in a week. And I've got to be honest, you guys, they're talking about possibly hiring a band, getting a food truck. What are they going to do for, like, decorate? And I'm like, you wanted to get married next week. I have news for you guys. You are getting none of that. You're not. There is no business out there that specializes in wedding stuff is going to have room to do your shit a week out. It's simply not going to happen. Maybe the food truck thing that Michael suggests, perhaps, and only maybe. But, otherwise, just anything like a traditional wedding, you aren't going to pull off in a week. You simply will not. It won't happen. I guarantee. So yeah, they have this like kind of heart to heart. He's like, I'm here with you and I know things are rough, but I have your back. And just knowing that he's like lying to her while he's saying all of this to her, I know he believes what he's saying, but it's just simply not quite entirely true. And then we have the two of them. He's having a sleepover with her for the first time and saying that he is not going to mess around with her because her abuela is right down the hall. She convinces him to do some things anyway. And we have a smash cut from the two of them starting to fool around to her in bed. And he's like going down on her, I guess. I don't know. Maybe he's not quite that far down. But she is whispering like how she wants him so bad. And then he pokes his head up out of the covers, and it is not Michael, it is Rafael. And she wakes up with a start, feeling a bit of a way about it. And this is a whole thing, this episode. The fact that she had this sex dream about Rafael. And while her mother says there's no need to upset Michael, you don't need to tell him about it, they wind up in one of these pre-marriage like meetings that are traditionally had with a priest by a couple. And it's meant to be like sort of a counseling session. I hate to call it that because it doesn't really feel like that's what's happening, but it's traditional. And she gets sort of put in this spot where she feels like she has to tell him about it. Now, one, she really doesn't have to. The priest asks, there's no other physical connection, is there? And she hesitates before she says no. And Michael's like, why did you hesitate? And I'm also like, Jane, why did you hesitate? Because that was a dream. There is no physical connection. So you can say no, and you are being 100% truthful. But I know that she has to say, because Michael has to know for the plot. But then Michael gets really mad. And he accuses her of fantasizing about this guy. Everyone, that isn't a fantasy. That was a dream. Right? Like, can we all get on board with this? A dream happens when you are literally unconscious. You are not choosing what happens in dreams. Unless you're like lucky enough to be somebody who can lucid dream, which I've never been able to figure out. But I have had sex dreams about people that I am the opposite of attracted to, and woken up and just been like, brain, come on. Like, you have no control over that. So in my mind, sharing this with Michael to begin with was super unnecessary. And she was just asking for trouble by admitting that she had this dream at all, because there is nothing voluntary about it. Yes. Is she having some feelings for Rafael? She is. That's its own thing. It's getting conflated with this thing because the show needs it to. But I just want to emphasize that if somebody gets mad at you for things you're dreaming about, and one can say all you want about like, well, it's in your subconscious, so it's manifesting because it's in your subconscious. Again, I have had dreams about sexual relationships with people that I would never dream of hooking up with in my life. So there's a lot of reasons a dream can happen. It has nothing necessarily to do with genuinely feeling a way. In fact, if it did, I would be having a lot more sex dreams than I do, because why wouldn't I? You know, if we could all manage that, I think we'd all have way more fun dreams than we wind up with a lot of the time. So it's just like, it just bothered me that he keeps accusing her of fantasizing, and she doesn't really defend herself in any way. Never mind the fact that, yeah, it is the father of her child. And even if he weren't a man that she had like a little bit of a romantic history with, that she was in the moment interested in, even if it were a man that she had no interest in whatsoever, I could understand having a sex dream, because normally sex is what it takes to get pregnant with somebody's child. And so your mind would just automatically, in a lot of ways, be going there subconsciously. So that kind of dream, honestly, it would be surprising if it hadn't happened in a lot of ways. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because there's just so much, like, I can understand her personally feeling really weird about it. And I think a lot of us have probably had sex dreams where when we run into the person later, it is a little bit weird because the dream was very real, or it just sort of left us feeling flustered, and it gets brought up when we're around that person. That's fine. But the way that it was sort of treated like something that she chose was odd. So we have then a scene with Rafael, and of course, like, it cuts to her and the sex dream thing, and Rafael is like on the phone and he's all sweaty, and it's just this really, like, he's got a tank top on, so he's like clearly just working out. This dude is so incredibly jacked that it's almost too much. I'm like, you could tone it down, bruh. It's okay. And this is when Petra comes to sit down with him and is talking about, have they figured anything else out? And, you know, he has figured out that she was sleeping with Zaz, but he hasn't said anything to her yet. And it's a sort of fascinating scene because he's like aware that she was, but hasn't told her. So the way that he's talking to her, I think part of what he's doing is trying to get a sense of any flicker of guilt on her face as he's talking to her, and there isn't one. And I think that's the thing that is the most unnerving, is when you have figured out somebody's lying and they are continuing to pull off this lie on the surface that, you know, if you hadn't gotten additional information, you would be falling for. You know, finding out somebody's a really good liar, that is unnerving. It's a real, like, it'll get in your head. And even if the thing that led you to finding out they're a good liar isn't about you, it will kind of fuck your head up sometimes to realize, like, I was there and I know that didn't happen that way, but the way they just told this person it happened, they were very convincing. And how many things have they maybe done that with to me, you know? So anyway, we have her conversation with her mother about maybe having feelings. Her mother convinces her that it's just her hormones and her like emotions getting sort of mixed up about being pregnant with this guy's baby. She leaves, and then there's a sort of like moment with Abuela and Shamara where she's trying to convince Shamara to tell Jane who her father is. Shamara, for her part, has decided that this gift that she got from, what is his name? Rogelio? I'm forgetting his name. Sorry, guys. But the telenovela star, her father, I will say this, guys. When she first opened the basket and she finds the bracelet that says XO, my immediate thought was XO, like it turns out it was kiss, hug. And she is like, show, like my name. And I was like, oh, wild. I guess that would be, but it's the same as kiss, hug. So when it turns out that is what it is, I was just kind of cracking up because I was like, yeah, that's sort of, that'd be a real easy mistake to make though. Like, I get it. Rogelio is correct. Oh boy, I remembered a name. Everybody write this down on your calendar. And we have this great moment where Shamara is like perking up her boobs, like she's pulling them up in her bra and like pulling the neckline of her shirt down to show the top edge of the lace of her bra. Yo, this is a vibe. I used to do this shit so hard. Oh my God. Back in the days where I had really pretty bras and perky boobs and was on the prowl, and I would actively show off my bra if it was pretty enough. Like I would make sure it was showing, because I would just be like, this lace is too pretty to hide. Why even wear it if I'm not going to show it off? So I just really enjoyed that little moment. I was like, oh, I remember those days. But yeah, she goes over there to his trailer, and there's this like glamorous woman there who it turns out is his ex-wife and his manager. And I guess he just never mentioned to Shamara that he was married at all. And she's also just sort of hurt because she's really been thinking there's something between them. And the fact is, this bracelet accidentally fell off in the gift basket, which is truly insane. Like, but it's fine. And so it was not for her. It was just as impersonal a gift basket as it seemed to be. And also the fact that this woman's in his trailer, it sort of gives the vibe that he is probably still banging her. She's like in a nightdress and robe, like, you know, she's dressed in this sort of sexy lingerie thing. She is not in manager clothing. And the overall thing for Shamara this episode is disappointment in the fact that she thought the two of them had something more serious than it turns out they did. She really is having feelings for him, genuine feelings. And she's realizing that he doesn't see it that way. And that is a bad place to be. We've all been there, you know? And it's one thing to just realize that you like feel that way about somebody who doesn't feel that way about you. But when you've already slept with them, it adds another like kind of layer to things that complicates it a lot of the time. There are times where you can be like, all right, it's not like that. And you can let it go and just enjoy it for what it is. But if your feelings have started to get really like intense, it's kind of hard to pump the brakes and go back to enjoying yourself. You start to yearn, and that's the worst, man. Yearning sucks. So I have a feeling that he's going to grow to have feelings for Xiaomara in a way that he doesn't at the moment. But when she calls him to sort of berate him about this, he defends himself by being like, dude, I was single. We haven't seen each other in ages. Like, come on. He doesn't say I was single. He is single. And to be fair, she's out here playing the field a lot as well. At the moment, she's not, but she was up until quite recently. And, you know, they hooked up the one time. This is not exactly like a serious thing. And it's never been established that way. So as much as I understand her being upset, it's not like she has the right to expect anything of him at this time. It's just her being upset in a way that like she can't help that she emotionally is attached. And he says something on the phone to her about how it's a chemical thing, which is how she described to herself to Jane when Jane was a little girl. And she says something later to Jane about how with Rafael, it might be a chemical thing that can happen. I've had it happen. And you have to be really careful because it's easy to mistake it for something else. And I have to say, that is the truest thing. You guys, think back. Those of you who have like had multiple relationships, are there people that you look back that you really thought at the time you were in love with, and you look back and you're like, I was so not in love with them? Because yeah, I have that. A chemical thing it's real, man. And you believe it. When you're in the midst of it, you really believe it. And then you finally come out the other side, and that like fog of hormones and whatever is behind you. And you're like blinking in the sun going, Jesus, what was that? It's like you were a different person. It's weird. So, you know, I appreciate her telling this to Jane because that's true, but you can never convince somebody who's in the midst of a chemical thing that it is a chemical thing only. It just doesn't work. That's the way that's set up. You know, nature wants you to just like procreate, and it doesn't care. So it convinces you that there's real things happening because that's the way your body is like supposed to work. And it's just, there's absolutely no way to get someone to back up and see when they're in the middle of the situation that it isn't real. Doesn't work. Doesn't happen. I'm sorry. It just doesn't. Rowan says, most of my relationship regrets involve taking things too seriously when I should have just enjoyed it while it lasted. Yo, same. Completely get that. It's just, you know, it's an urge that some of us have where we want there to be, especially if, like me, you had a household that maybe was like a little bit less stable and you're looking for stability. You can try and force it. You know, there's a lot. And I can definitely see that with Jane growing up with, you know, just her mother and not having a father in the picture. That doesn't automatically mean you feel like there was something missing in your life. But Jane was brought up in a household that had a strong presence from her grandmother who was very traditional. And I feel like having it hammered into her head that a father should be present was probably happening. And that she felt that like lack. And I wouldn't be surprised if she would be the type to kind of jump into marriage a little bit soon because she wants something to have that duality mother-father thing going on in her life that she didn't have when she was a girl. Because that's frankly what a lot of our lives as adults are about, is pursuing something that we didn't have as kids that we wish we had. And we're like, now I'm a grown-up and I can make that happen for myself. Sometimes, though, that is not the case. So anyway, we have Jane running into Rafael, and she's just like so into him in the scene that he actually gets a halo, which eventually disappears when he mentions that he sees her as a sister. But it's a very funny effect that they keep up throughout the episode, is this halo thing. And he is asking her to write some copy about the hotel. And he's like, focus on the fantasy of it and make it sexy. And she's just like, good God. And she hightails it out of there. We have a short scene with Rafael and the stepmother, Rose, I think is her name. And she is presenting him with some like changed plans for how they're going to decorate the spa. And she asks him if he has seen his sister, because she says, I suggested a attorney to her and she never showed up. And he says, I think she's on a bender. And this is an interesting scene because he has no idea that his sister and Rose were involved at all, apparently. So he saw his sister on surveillance footage in a robe, pulling the alarm in the hotel for no apparent reason. And we know all about that. But he is interpreting this as erratic behavior on her part that indicates she's been drinking, which honestly, I would also. I mean, come on. Without any other context, of course I would. The only thing that I would be interested in if I were him, because I'm extra nosy, is I would be keeping an eye on what room she came out of and checking up to see if she was still there, which might lead me to finding out what's going on, because that is the room that his father has got his name on, I'm assuming. But yeah, this moment, Rose being like genuinely worried, is kind of sweet. And he's like, well, none of my other stepmothers cared about her, and it's really nice that you care. And I was just like, oh man, dude, you don't even get it. Then we have him talking to his father, and his father is still pretty mad about the fact that he went ahead and had that memorial for Zaz, and accuses the fact that they are only at 50% capacity on the memorial, which I think is ludicrous. But I also don't really I don't understand the way a lot of this stuff works personally, you know? To me, the idea that like a really high profile murder happened someplace, the only thing that I can imagine is people flooding the place, because we are by nature kind of morbid, leering voyeurs. So what I would think is if there was word that got out about how a man was dropped onto and impaled by an ice sculpture at a hotel, that place would be fucking packed. Honestly, is how I would see it. But evidently that's not what's happening. And his dad is like accusing him of it being inept. And he's like, don't worry. I'm bringing in somebody to help, and I am also going to stick around and supervise things. My schedule won't permit me personally to do it. So here we have, and there's this guy called Lachlan. And it turns out, we find out later, that Lachlan was engaged to Petra. And Rafael swooped in and scooped her away. And I am deeply fucking curious about what it was that led her to leaving Lachlan. Because I have been under the impression this entire time that Petra approached Rafael with a plan, that she came into his life intending to try and get into a relationship with him for her own reasons. And it is seeming more like, and this could still be part of a plan, she may have gotten involved with Lachlan hoping it would lead to her getting close to Rafael. If so, she really played the long game. And she also took a risk here, because she's with him and she's like raising her champagne glass to celebrate the fact that they are engaged as of the same day that Lachlan gets promoted past Rafael, which honestly is a pretty satisfying scene. I like Rafael, and he is such a douchebag in that scene that watching him get one-upped by this guy was actually pretty satisfying. But he just happens to catch her eye. He had never seen her before. And then he really gives her a look when she's like just her engagement has just been announced. And it's a real tricky thing where I'm like, look, Petra is attractive. I'm not trying to say she's not attractive. But Rafael is there with this fucking bombshell woman that I think blows Petra out of the water. So personally, I was like, really, dude? And all I can think is, one, maybe her vibe is very different than other women he's dated, and that's why he suddenly got interested, because maybe she's just like a little bit less of a party girl, which it seems like is the type he's going for at the moment. And also, mainly, I'm sort of thinking he doesn't like Lachlan. And maybe Petra wouldn't really have necessarily caught his eye as much if she weren't about to marry a man that he doesn't like and would like to sink. And that's really more of what drew him to her, is the, you know, added bonus of being able to fuck this guy's life up. So anyway, the fact that Lachlan has been brought back in, it's basically Raphael's dad being like, I'm going to have somebody babysit you. And I was just like, that is quite insulting, though. I mean, the fact is, Rafael is taking things so seriously that the fact that his father isn't really, I don't even want to say he doesn't see it. He doesn't trust him. I think just really bothers him, you know? And when a parent doesn't believe in you, I mean, that's gonna bother you. That sucks. So I'm going to jump over to I'm trying to see which scenes I've already talked about because I've been kind of going all over the place. Okay, let's jump to the scene where Petra is talking to Michael, and she will not give him her location during the hours that he needs an alibi. So they're talking, and she's basically being like, I will tell them that you tampered with evidence. And he's like, look, I know that you're not bluffing, but I don't have, and I won't tell you. And I'm still so curious about this. We find out later she is in a car with a man who has been extorting her, and he calls her Natalia, and they're speaking Czech. And genuinely, no idea. Still no idea. I don't know if this is related to her mother and the burns that she seems to have suffered or what, but Michael is having her look at these photos and trying to see if there's anything that stands out to her, because he is grasping for straws to keep her from getting arrested. And what he finally lands on, and I really did appreciate this. This was interesting. He finally brings her up to the room. He's not supposed to do this. And lets her in to look around and see if there's anything that stands out as being weird from when she was in there last. And she points out the damaged wall in one area and says, we're going to be charging your brute coworkers for damaging our property. And he stops and looks at that, and then looks at the crime scene photos, and not the crime scene photos. There are some other photos taken from earlier. It's from the surveillance photos that they were taking. And that wall does not have that ding in it. So he figures out what would have caused it. And also there was a glass in the room. And his partner is insisting Petra has to be the one. But rightfully, in this case, Michael is like, it doesn't make sense that Petra is the one who drank with him. She wouldn't wipe her glass down. She has her prints all over the fucking room. Why would she do that? It doesn't make sense. And it turns out that the dent in the wall is from a bellman's cart, and bellmen wear gloves. So that's why they wouldn't have left fingerprints on the glass. Having been a bellhop, I did not wear gloves. Full disclosure. I did wear a little vest and tie sort of uniform, but not gloves. However, we were not in this feels like a very high-end area where they're competing with a lot of other hotels of its type, and it makes sense that they would do things really traditionally, but I did not do that. But yeah, so this is enough for them to begin to look through the bellman potentially, or see if there's any discrepancies in the scheduling, or perhaps even look at the security footage of that evening and see if there's anyone in a uniform that shouldn't be. There's all kinds of ways that this can go, but it at least has delayed things with Petra and will ensure that she doesn't get arrested. And also, while he's in that room, he's looking around with Petra, Jane comes and knocks on the door, and she's looking for him to give him the letter, which she has recovered and realized that he didn't get, which is a whole other thing we'll get to. And he's very short with her. He says this isn't a good time. She's insistent. He comes out and he says, I said this isn't a good time. What is so hard to understand? He's a real dick. And she rightfully, she's about to hand him this letter and she doesn't. And is like, you know what? I get that this hasn't been easy. But the whole thing with the meeting that we had the other day is about how it's not going to be easy. And this is the first bump of many in the road. And it doesn't feel like we're getting through this together the way we need to if we're going to make this work. And honestly, the fact that this is happening is fucking heartbreaking. And I want to marry you, but only if things go back to the way they were. And as much as I understand what she means there, it's not gonna, Jane. I don't know how to tell you this, but it won't. That's not to say that you guys don't love each other, but nothing goes back to the way it was. It doesn't happen. Just across the board. And I mean this for all relationships, romantic, platonic, doesn't matter. Something major happens and it is all different after that. There is no avoiding it. That's the nature of relationships. It's the nature of human beings. And trying to recapture the way things had been before that occurred is a recipe for heartbreak and disappointment. You are never getting back to a place you used to be. That's not how life works, and that's not the point of life. So I get what she means here, but it's simply her kind of low-key wanting things to just not have happened the way they did. And it's happened the way it did, hon. There's no undoing it. So as much as I appreciate him coming to her and the whole thing, it doesn't really change anything, fundamentally speaking, for me about their relationship and the way things are going. So yeah, this scene, it's a really tough moment because he says something to her earlier about how if you have feelings for another man, we shouldn't be getting married. Then she has this thing about, I want to marry you, but not unless things go back to the way they were. And you're not going to get things to go back to the way they were. And she can't just make herself stop having feelings. Rafael says he sees her more as a sister type, and the halo goes away when he says that, which is supposed to sort of indicate that popped that bubble. But it doesn't go away that easily, So I just think they're both wishing for a reality that doesn't exist, frankly. So in the midst of all of this, there's this amazing thing going on where Rogelio is a guest at the hotel and asking for service, from Jane and getting very like pushy about asking about her private life because he doesn't want to tell her who he is and violate Xiaomara's trust, but he also wants to encourage her and like establish some kind of relationship with her. And so he's like complimenting how she pours her the iced tea. When he sees the ring, he correction. He says, "When are you getting married?" And then has to cover by saying, "I noticed the ring." And when she says a week, he kind of freaks out and says, "That's too quick." And she has to be like, "I think it's okay. I'm going to go now." And I couldn't help but notice, I don't know like how on purpose this was, but I have to assume it's pretty on purpose. After she says, "I'm going to go now," she puts the whole pitcher of iced tea on his table as if to be like, "Now I won't have to come back and deal with you if you need more iced tea." Like she was truly washing her hands of him, you know? So as she walks away, he starts to follow her. And she's getting really agitated because he's following her. And then in front of her is Rafael. And the two of them are pincering her in. And she's trying to back away from Rafael and winds up backing into the pool. And it's actually a pretty funny scene where he jumps in to save her and she shoves him off her and says, "It's 4 feet deep, Baywatch." And he says, "I'm sorry, I didn't know if you could swim." And she says, "You know I can stand, right?" And I burst out laughing. That shit killed me. Unfortunately, Michael comes across the two of them with him like, you know, kind of in a situation that feels very flirty, where he's like wiping the hair out of her face and she's looking up at him with this like really goobery expression, biting her lip. And she's trying to say to Michael it was totally innocent. And I know that the reason they're there is because she was trying so hard to stay away from Rafael. But honestly, the way she was looking at him, there's absolutely no other conclusion to come to. And I am not mad at Michael for jumping to the conclusion that he did, because he wasn't entirely wrong, frankly, you know? So then we come to the scene where she's talking to her mother about what she should do to get Michael to believe that this is not an issue. And her mother is like, if you were a regular person, as she calls her, I would just tell you to go bang him with gusto. What's your version of that? So she decides that she is going to write him a dirty letter. And what happens here, it's really funny because I was expecting this to be something that she sent by email and she unknowingly sent it to the wrong email address. But it's an actual physical letter that she prints out and is intending to like tuck into his bag at work. Which the only reason I guess is for the plot to work the way that it does. I still think it could have worked with email, but nevertheless, she also wrote up the article. And she prints that out too, which once again doesn't really make sense. Like that kind of copy, why would you give a physical copy of it to someone when the point, I'm sure, is that they're going to use it on a website or something? So you will give them the text in an easily copy and pastable format. Whatever. She prints it out. She accidentally, very predictably, gives Michael the hotel article and gives Rafael the dirty letter, and comes to see Michael and see what he thought of it. He has no idea what she's talking about, mentions the hotel article, and she is completely confused and then realizes her mistake and goes sprinting back to the hotel. And Rafael has already read it. It's a kind of a funny scene because he's like just casually reading and then sits up and is like, "Wait, what?" And she comes busting in and he doesn't want to listen to her. And he keeps trying to talk about like, look, this is not going to happen. And she's like, this was for Michael. This was my fiance. I gave it to you by mistake. And he's like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. Because, you know, I was about to tell you that I see you like a sister. That's when his halo goes out. And yet we see that night that he has a sex dream about her. And obviously this is going to shift things in another direction entirely. Yeah, I appreciate that his instinct was not, I'm going to go for this, because, and it has nothing to do with Petra really. It's just the fact that she is engaged and she is in a compromising position for him, and not in a good way. And there's a lot of baggage here. So I wouldn't be able to help but feel like it was just kind of gross of him if he immediately jumped on board with this. But the fact that he is sort of resistant and then his subconscious like kind of gets him, I can accept that a lot more easily. So that's what's going on with that situation. She does eventually, she goes to give the letter to Michael. She doesn't give it to him. I don't know if she gives it to him at the bridal shop when he shows up there. So I'm kind of wondering if we're ever going to get to see his reaction to it, but she apparently like really went for it. So good for her. So, all right, let's back up and talk about Lachlan and the whole situation with Petra, because there's a pretty good scene where Petra's basically overdoing it with her encouraging Rafael. And he sort of tells her, mind your own business, in a spot that would be very audible to Lachlan. But I, as well as Lachlan, did not see this setup. And we find out later that's exactly what it was. She convinces Lachlan. She basically tells him this is the thing that Rafael is going to propose. And he wants her to like help him present it and get one over on her husband. And when she says, what's in it for me? Hilariously, this man says, you get to fuck me. Sir, no offense, but like, come on. I'm sorry, but no. I just can't get over that. Oh my God. No. What? Stop it. Sweetie. Oh my God. So anyway, she says hard pass and leaves him sitting there, but he decides he's still going to like take the initiative and try and scoop him. And when he makes his presentation, it turns out what she sort of fed him was only half an idea that had like some big issues that were, apparently there were like zoning problems and a bunch of stuff that it turns out Rafael had already worked out. He was like working on this for over a year, apparently, this proposal. And she only gave Lachlan just enough for him to like look like a real fucking amateur. So essentially she set him up to make Rafael look good in comparison. And he realizes as he's standing there watching Rafael carry the day that he got fucking played yet again after she left him for Rafael to begin with. And I really enjoyed this subplot because it is, I know we're probably not going to get to see her and Rafael working together again based on the way this ends, but I really couldn't help but sort of enjoy it. The two of them are, if they're going to be like honest about what their relationship is, they're a pretty good team, you know? So all that to say, in the end, Rafael is talking to her and is like, that was so devious. What a great idea, convincing somebody you're an ally until you get what you want. And he says it in such a way that even she, with as oblivious as she's been up to now, stops and kind of looks at him. And he just says, how long have you been sleeping with Zaz anyway? And she does a very like kind of half-hearted, wait, what? And he's like, girl, stop. We're done. And walks away from her. And because this dude that she meets in the parking garage is saying he wants more money, I'm really curious how she's going to make this happen. Because obviously the way that she's managing to get money, at least I'm assuming, is through Rafael because she's married to him. And if he is cutting her off and trying to drop her completely, I don't know how she's getting this guy any more money. And so she has to try and make things work somehow. And the only thing that I could think is potentially like hooking up with Rafael's dad, which, all things considered, I don't think is out of the question. I mean, the thing is, I don't really know what it is she's attempting here. She's getting money for the man that's extorting her, but there feels like there's more to it than that for her personally. And I've been assuming it was about something that Rafael did that she's trying to get revenge for. But it may, if it's just about the money, his dad would do just as well. I have to assume, though, he would probably be more careful than his son has been about giving the money. I also have to assume he knows how bad it would look in terms of like, you know, just public relations, to start seeing his son's ex-wife. So I don't know how likely that is in terms of like publicly facing. She might be able to hook up with him on the sly, but I don't see her like getting married or anything. And she'd have to displace Rose. Honestly, I don't think that would be that hard. Although Rose, I think, is considerably hotter than Petra. No offense, Petra. But yeah, I really, it's like her overall objective is what I'm wanting to know about, because when she's been with Zaz, the whole thing has been, let's get this money and then we'll be able to run away together. And I took that at face value, but now I'm starting to think that was never going to be what happened in the first place. I think she was playing Zaz to get what she needed for someone else or for herself. And that means if I don't know what she wants, I can't know what she's going to do next. This is like a real Peter Baelish thing. When he's talking to Sansa in the Storm of Swords, he tells her that sometimes I just do things because they confuse the issue. And if people don't know what it is you want, they can never predict what you're going to do next, because if your actions like don't align, it's impossible to draw a line from one to the other. So that's where I'm at right now. It's like, there is so much I don't know about what Petra is after and her history that I can't decide what she will do next, because who knows? And, you know, the whole thing with the Bellman, who murdered Zaz and why? Like, there's that whole thing with the guy who has no face. What's his name? I can't remember. But he was supposedly like an underling for this dude. And that could possibly be who came and took care of him. But does that have a connection with Petra or no? I'm not aware of either way. So, okay, now we're going to bounce back to Jane, and we are going to talk about Sin Rostro. Thank you, Rowan. Rowan says also, Rogelio is my favorite character on this show. Just a wonderful, self-involved golden retriever of a man. He really is a golden retriever. That doesn't feel like quite a pompous enough dog. He's definitely some kind of like lap dog type, like, but one that's got a little bit more of an attitude. I'm going to figure it out. One of those ones that has that really long hair. What are they called? Angora? That's a rabbit. But you know what I'm talking about. One of those guys. So let's talk about the scene at the bridal shop. She's trying on a gown. Honestly, as lovely as Jane looked, I think she can really do a lot better than this dress. It was very whatever. But honestly, I kind of feel that way about like most wedding gowns. This is why my wedding gown looked the way it did, because I am always going to want more. And Michael comes in, has his thing with her, really sweet moment. But there's also the thing with Rogelio. So he's trying to look through the window. He's attempting to keep a low profile, but because he's very recognizable, he gets swarmed by a bunch of women outside the door, and to escape them comes inside the shop. Which, of course, at this point, all he is yet another encounter with this weird telenovela star who is oddly intrusive, as the narrator puts it. And Jane is just like, what is he fucking doing here? And we have a wonderful moment where he's like not sure what to say. Shamara had said earlier to her abuela, I just don't want her to hate me. And so she's been resisting, and she finally tells him, go ahead and tell her. So we get this bit here that I was laughing so hard. I had seen it. I've watched this episode twice, but I still laughed the second time. Just say it. Okay. This is difficult to say. I am your father. What? I am your father. Oh, I heard you. Okay, but you said what, so I thought you didn't. That line delivery, and he's so deadpan with it, is so good. Oh, that cracked me up. And poor Jane here. It's so hard for me to put myself in her place, because it's such a foreign idea to me of a question this big in your life. Who was my father? That is like a fundamental question. And having that hanging over your head, and the person you love most, who you trusted most, it turns out has been lying this whole time to your face every day. And recently, even more so because of what you're already going through. The fact that they were keeping this secret would hurt more. This is a really tough one. I was like, I just really felt for her. And as much as I want her to immediately be like, I understand, Mom, it's completely unreasonable to expect that, you know? So the reaction that she has, which is basically to like kick everybody out of the room and sit and cry by herself, I felt like that's entirely valid. The only thing throughout these scenes that I wish was happening, and I understand why it's not, but I feel like it's a kind of missed opportunity for comedic value. If you have ever gone to one of these bridal shops, you will have a saleswoman hanging over you every absolute second of the time that you spend there. They are going to be up your ass, like fixing the dress, adjusting things, holding it so that you can see what it would look like if it was altered, a different undergarment in case the straps don't work, all kinds of stuff. And there are multiple highly personal moments between this and her and Michael, and having a saleswoman who just kept poking her head in, being like, is it okay to come out now? And being shooed away. And then like at the end, Jane just dissolving into tears, and this lady just kind of being in the back in the break room, like, I can't go out there now, or should I go out there now? You know, I feel like that would have worked really well, because otherwise it's like there's nobody working at this place. You don't see a soul who is staff. It is all her family and personal friends. So this moment would have, again, I get why they're trying to like not do that, because they're leaning into the pathos of the moment. But if we were going to be solely in touch with reality, we could still make it a little bit light here and there. And I still think that could have worked. You could have even had the sales lady come out and like hug her and just be there. And it be kind of an added moment of sadness, because nobody is there for Jane at this time except for a stranger, which could have its own sort of like bittersweetness to it, you know? But yeah, like at first when Shamara said, I just don't want her to hate me, I was like, of course she's not going to hate you. But when the scene happens, I feel like the actress playing Jane does a really good job of selling the hurt of being lied to like that. And it just makes me wonder if she ever finds out how Michael was lying to her about Petra. I don't know what happens with that. Like, my thing is, it could be possible that she never finds out, but I really want her to find out. I really don't like, as even if he said in this scene, even if you decide to keep the baby, I'm there with you 100%. And at this point, it's too late to prove that because he's already gotten Petra off the charges and he believes that she didn't kill the guy. So it's not like he's acting against justice. You know, he really believes Petra is innocent of this, but he is having trouble keeping her out of jail. However, it's very easy to be like, no matter what, I'm there with you, when your perfidy is likely going to go unnoticed now because everything has worked out the way that it did. So I don't know. I just feel like I am always a fan of just everything being out in the open. And, you know, does that sometimes destroy relationships? Yeah. But sometimes, like, maybe that's okay, you know? I just don't really, they're convincing as being in love with each other. They're convincing as I can see them being a couple in other circumstances and making it. But as of right now, I just cannot ship them. I can't do it. But I honestly don't really ship her with Rafael either. Like, I feel like there's a third guy somewhere. He'll come into the picture. I don't know. I'm just saying. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap up this episode, but this is a good one. I really enjoyed this one. And I want to mention too that, as I had said before, Owen has been watching this all with me. And he is really, really enjoying it. I was going to sit down and watch this, and he was like, oh, I don't want to get spoiled, so I'm going to go in the other room. And I was like, no, you caught up with me now. So this episode is one that you also haven't seen. But he was actually like really excited. He's like, oh, cool. So he came and sat down and watched it with me. But yeah, the moment when Rafael tells Petra we're done, Owen was like pretty pleased because he was wanting to see her get got a little bit, you know. All right, I'm going to wrap. Thank you guys again so much for listening. Appreciate you all. Thank you, Heather, for commissioning this. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.